the toxic chief audit executive. It will be presented by Mohammed Qaisi, who is a public speaker and consultant. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Mohammed Qaisi from Lebanon. Mohammed, the floor is all yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a nice break and a nice lunch, and I hope that you are also enjoying the conference. I look forward for a very fruitful and interesting presentation on the toxic chief audit executive, avoiding toxicity in internal audit. Now, just to give you a small background as to why I chose this topic. Actually, this started out maybe a few months back, where I wrote an article on toxicity in internal audit. I believe that this is a topic that is very important for us to discuss because it will help us become better. If it's all opinionated, the whole presentation is about ideas that I have in my mind about certain traits that can cause us to become toxic and will make us lose track of the main objective behind IA. Therefore, I look forward at the end of the presentation for your feedback relating to this topic. Before we start, first, all the opinions here are those represented by myself and do not present any of the organizations that I work for or I present at the same time. Okay, so we're going to have, the presentation is going to be into 4 sections. Basically, we will first talk about the organizational challenges that chief audit executives face. And it's going to be really interesting to have these discussions to see whether all these conflicting pressures that we go through may actually push us towards toxicity in a certain way. Therefore, we will talk about these challenges that we always face as chief audit executives. Then the main topic, which is the key toxic traits that chief audit executives could actually gain or actually have, how we can avoid toxicity in internal audit. And then I will conclude with a message to my fellow colleagues on a personal message that I have to all my fellow heads of internal audits and internal audit directors who are working in this very amazing and wonderful profession of ours. First, before I start, since the discussion is going to be all about toxicity, I would like first to send out my best to those great chief audit executives who are living up to the IIA standards, are living up by the code of ethical conduct, and who are really helping their organizations become better at what they do. I want to send you my best, and I am sure all of you make us better auditors and better at what we do. So let's talk about now the organizational challenges faced by a chief audit executive. So this is in front of us, the chief audit executive. Look at how many stakeholders that he or she needs to deal with. So first, the chief audit executive, as we all know, has a responsibility towards the audit committee. They report to the audit committee, and there are certain expectations that this audit committee will expect from this chief audit executive that he or she needs to live up to. And these expectations are that they report objectively and independently on the overall internal control environment within the organization, and that they flag to them any critical areas that warrant direct attention, and at the same time that any areas that can also be improved in terms of governance, risk management, and compliance are also addressed. So we have this first big expectation from one party, which is the audit committee. Then we have the CEO office, the senior management. They also have expectations from the internal audit. In many companies, you will see that management has a totally different impression about what internal auditors should do. And this impression sometimes conflicts with that of the audit committee and also creates a different set of expectations that the chief audit executive needs to balance out. We have also the heads of departments, which are actually the audit clients, which are being subject to internal audit reviews. They also, depending on the maturity, the cultural maturity of that organization, have their own understanding of internal audit and their own expectations of what internal audit is, which also needs to be balanced out by the chief audit executive. We have, of course, the chairperson of the board of directors. He or she also have a different expectations of what this audit function is doing within the organization. We have the internal audit team and the deputy head of internal audit. They also have this aggressive, maybe, approach to internal audit. They want to get everything done very quickly, and they put extra pressure on the chief audit executive to also live up to the practical challenges that are facing the department in the organization. We have the regulators and the external auditors watching on the chief audit executive, also having their own different set of expectations of what he or she should be doing. And then we have the overall impression that the employees in the organizations have about the audit function and what they should do. Of course, we will have the other monitoring functions, which are the risk and compliance, and we have also who should do what, where, how, and when debates all the time. So you can see that this chief audit executive really is under a lot of pressure. There are too many different types of expectations. There are conflicting expectations in sometimes, and he or she needs to always live up to these expectations and try to meet them at all the time, while maintaining the IIA standards, maintaining independence, and maintaining objectivity. So this could, in some ways, push certain chief audit executives into certain toxic traits, which we will talk about. Because we have to remember that this chief audit executive also is a person, career-oriented. He might or she might have plans to go into the business or to make extra remuneration. This also is an interpersonal pressure that we need to address. So let us move forward now and see, based on these different types of pressures, what could be impacted. So contradicting expectations, auditee acceptance of reports. We need to have them accept our recommendations. We need the CEO to take over and say, okay, I will take ownership and seek implementation of these recommendations. At the same time, we want the audit committee support. As I mentioned, we have remuneration, benefits, and the career path that needs to be met. We have a general organizational perception of internal audit that we need to work on. We need to have people to actually trust the audit function. And I need the audit team to be satisfied, motivated, to move forward. We all know and understand that it's not all the time that we win our small battles in the organizations as internal audit, and this could result in demotivation for employees. And as I mentioned, we have third-party expectations and support. So now, one of my friends, when I wrote the article, he said, Muhammad, can you really say, Muhammad, that all of these are toxic traits? I mean, sometimes people do these mistakes or fall into these traps, but they're not really toxic people. So how come you're coming and telling us whoever is doing this is a toxic person? So I clearly answered my friend saying that, no, I'm not saying that anyone who falls into the trap of these traits is a toxic internal auditor. No. However, there's a key differentiator here, which is intent. We all make mistakes. And working in our profession as internal audit, which requires many times a certain set of judgment, we are prone to make mistakes or to have errors in judgment. What is differentiating between putting us into toxicity or whether pure error or even incompetence is intent. Intention is a key part of our job. What we recommend and the way we address our different clients, it's all about intention. If our intention goes down to the basic founding principles of our job, which is to assist our organization in achieving its strategic objectives, in assisting the departments throughout the organization achieving their objectives, ensure that I have a sound system of governance, I have a good risk management framework that enables the organization to identify and treat its risks, if my intention as a chief audit executive is always based on assisting my organization in living up to these founding principles, then I'm okay. But if my intentions are otherwise, if I have a different agenda, if, in other words, and excuse me for being blunt, if I have a different game plan, okay, this is where I start to venture into the world of toxicity. And therefore, we always need to ask ourselves, what is the true intention behind our actions, our recommendations, and our consultations? So what are these toxic traits that I came up with? And I know many will criticize, some will add, some will take out, and I welcome that. This is a purely opinionated presentation based on my experience throughout my career on things I've collected in different areas in which I have been engaged. So these toxic traits, first I would just, sorry, there was something on the screen. All right, so failing the auditee basically is a toxic trait. We'll talk about that, what that means. Wishful blindness, I believe this is a toxic trait that I have noticed not only among internal auditors, I have seen it with compliance professionals, I have seen it with risk management professionals, and we will talk about the act of wishful blindness and how can that be detrimental to the internal audit objectives. And always seeking ambiguity. This is gray areas are always exist in our job. We need to make sure that it is very clear what we are trying to tell our clients. Rationalizing incompetency. We encounter a lot of ineffective processes. And sometimes we could end up rationalizing certain outcomes. So we have to be very careful on that. Small and big issues, we will talk about what that means. Beating up the little guy. This one is a trait that I feel really personal. I take very personally. Is that when I take out my full force of the internal audit mandate on the small guy, and when it comes to issues relating to people who are more supported, we become more diplomatic and political. And this is an issue that I feel really personal about. I really hate when that happens. We'll talk about that. There's one called Schadenfreude. It's a German word. We will explain it in a bit. Entertaining organizational politics. Always, I've always been keen to write something on how internal auditors navigate organizational politics. I mean, every organization has its own set of organizational politics. It can be actually used in favor of the audit mandate or not. We will talk about that in a bit. Communicating with the audit committee and the management. Sometimes we may have to make sure that we are sending a consistent message to both, and the tone that is used is also consistent. I have seen a lot that the tone that the auditor uses in the audit committee makes a big difference between what is said and what is written, and the tone used in the way it was being said. I look forward to discussing this part as well. And we have a final trait, which I realize is failing the process for many different reasons. So let us walk through these traits together and see what they address. So the first one is failing the auditee. So trying to fail the audit client. This is a toxic trait that is really bad, and it really sends the wrong message about internal audit. So what is it about? Failing the auditee is really approaching the audit with the intention of failing the auditee for personal or inter-organizational purposes. So I determine before even I start the audit that based on perceptions, emotions, likes or dislikes, personal agendas, that I want to have an unsatisfactory audit report for this client. So guiding the audit in a specific direction for the purpose of personal or even career benefits is destructive to the chief audit executive, the audit function, and the organization, especially if there is, again, a certain intention behind it, a certain objective behind it. Our job is to help and to serve. We will talk about that in further detail in the other traits. So this is the first trait which I like to start out with, is that we have to always be objective in starting our jobs. We don't have any preconceived impressions about what the result of the audit needs to be. Even if that person that we are auditing is hated in the organization, we have to be as objective as possible. Wishful blindness. What is wishful blindness? So wishful blindness is the wrongful act by intentionally keeping oneself unaware of facts that would render him or her liable or implicated. The deliberate avoidance of knowledge. So this is a case where I hear about something happening wrong in the organization, and I say to myself, you know what? I will act as if I didn't hear that. Why? Because if I have to go there, I'm going to have to confront with maybe a very aggressive auditee or an aggressive management, or I get myself into some type of dilemma between different parties within the organization. So just let me act as if I didn't know about it. Look, I have seen this. And again, I have seen this with compliance people, I have seen it with risk management people, and with internal audit people. And it really angers me that we sometimes, or some people, tend to deliberately avoid addressing a serious issue for so many different reasons. It is our job and our mandate to address any emerging or imminent risk in the plan or not, in the best way possible, because again, it goes back to the key core principle behind our jobs, which is helping organizations achieve their objectives. So out of experience, I will tell you one thing. What we ignore today will come back tomorrow. Uglier, costlier, and much more damaging. What I'm meaning to say, if we are inclined to ignore an imminent risk or a major issue, it will get us by for a while. But eventually, people will change. New people will come. New events will happen. And what you thought was under the rugs will come back. Therefore, please, any issue that needs to be addressed is addressed directly. Always remember, it's a cycle. Address the critical issues now. The third trait. We all know that organizational politics exists in every organization. We will have people with and people against. We have two parties against each other, three parties. Sometimes it's very healthy for the organization. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it creates a toxic culture. And you know what? We have this chief audit executive and the audit department in the midst of all this politics. These are people, auditors, they have their career plans, they have their aspirations, they have their remuneration plans, and here they find themselves in the middle of organizational battles where sometimes they need to take sides. So what do? Organizational politics are self-serving behaviors that employees use to increase the probability of obtaining positive outcomes in organizations. Influenced by individuals may serve personal interests without regard to the effect on the organization itself. So this is where it becomes very tricky, where it becomes toxic, it becomes dangerous. When we have organizational politics, and we have seen many global organizations that fell due to organizational politics, where we had conflicts between different groups, and because they cared more about their own self-interest than that of the organization. So now the chief audit executive, they find themselves in the midst of these political related aspects. So the first thing we need to talk about is that we do not use the IA mandate for personal or career objectives. So the first thing is that the chief audit executive should not entertain this political game for their own personal or professional objectives. This becomes dangerous. Why? Because they lose credibility, even by those that they believe are siding with them. And I think this needs to be addressed very bluntly as to the role of internal audit in organizational politics. Now, this is not applicable everywhere. I am sure in many organizations, we have perfect governance frameworks and we have perfect governance setups where this is not a problem. But I am addressing these few to a little bit more organizations that could possibly suffer from these type of cultures. So career ambition and meeting IA objectives need to always be aligned, okay? So we have to always remember that our career objectives as internal audits need to be aligned with our objectives and need to be aligned with the organizational overall objectives, which are in the best interest of all the different stakeholders in the organization. What I always tell my team is that, okay, we can play the political game. That's not a big problem. However, we always play it, keeping in mind that we let it serve the IA mandate. So as long as it is serving the IA mandate, it is helping us achieve our audit objectives. It is helping us help our organizations achieve their objectives, then that's perfect. We have to play the game at the end of the day. It becomes dangerous when we play the game for other purposes and objectives. So navigate that game without becoming part of it. Because the moment we become part of it, we are no longer capable of giving objective opinions in our audit reports. And once credibility is lost as to whether our recommendations and our findings truly represent the issues impacting this process, this organization, or this incident, we are out. So as hard as it is to maintain that middle line, it is proven that this will serve us the best in the long run. So the fourth toxic trait I would like to talk about, which is Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude is a German word, and what it means, and actually I found this word while I was looking for a meaning for that understanding I had. So I had this understanding of something I wanted to explain, and I started Googling it, and I came across this German word called Schadenfreude. And what it means is pleasure derived by someone from another person's misfortune. Now, some of you are criticizing, probably saying, you know, what is he talking about? We have the best intention for everyone. Well, yes, most of us do. We have very good intentions, but some of us may not. And this is a message for all of us that we have to keep these personal feelings aside while we do our audits. We shouldn't be happy if we see someone failing an audit. We shouldn't be happy if we see someone not surviving an audit, and we shouldn't definitely not take pleasure in other people's misfortune. So, and this is where I want to open a very important topic about our role that has been maturing for so long over the years. You know, many of the previous presentations and in other conferences have always talked about the evolution of the internal audit role, where we went from a policeman to a control function to a risk function, now to a consultancy function, so on and so forth. We are maturing as we go along. And the reason we are making these leaps in maturity, because we are also changing as auditors, the way we think, the way we address complex issues. And therefore, we have to always remember that we are in a situation where we can influence the perception of the board of directors and senior management about other departments' performance. So what we speak in that audit committee about a specific department's performance is really a privilege and a responsibility for the internal auditor. We have to use it wisely to enable positive change in the organization, not destructive change in the organization. And this is where I always say that we have a key role, we have a key role to serve. We serve our auditees by helping them achieve their objectives. We help them succeed. We should be happy that they succeed. We need to influence the achievement of objectives. We need to go to that department and see how can we help them. Systems, processes, people, policies, procedures, so on and so forth, to help them achieve that objective. Not to be happy that we have an unsatisfactory report. Personally, as a chief audit executive, it usually upsets me when I had to issue an unsatisfactory audit report, because it made me believe that this department failed to achieve its objectives, and somewhere it's impacting the achievement of my organization's objective. And therefore, my key role is to serve these auditees in a way where I show them the path to achieve these objectives through instilling these much necessitated controls that mitigate those risks that impact the achievement of those objectives. Therefore, of course, we should be objective, no emotions, regardless of the fact of we like these people or not. So if we like a certain client, we don't take it easy on them. And if we don't like them on a personal basis, we actually take pleasure that they are not operating in the right manner. Failing the process. This is the fifth trait I would like to talk about. And what does that mean? Excuse me. Failing the process is that they do not provide constructive recommendations with the intent of keeping processes ineffective so they can keep uncovering errors. So what does that really mean? What am I really trying to say? First, we need to differentiate between two things. We need to differentiate between the failure of internal audit to find the root causes of the problems and address the real root cause recommendations that address the errors or the elements in that process. So let's put that aside. So I'm assuming here that no, we know exactly what needs to be done, but we don't really give these constructive recommendations. Why? Because we want the process to remain vague. Why would we want the process to remain vague? Internal audit is an evolutionary process that matures with process maturity. We need to understand that. Our role does not diminish as our organizations become better. On the contrary, our role transforms into something better. And history has proven that. If something in our internal audit professional history has proven is that as our organizations become better at what they do, they have more effective processes, better strategies, the internal audit function matures. Therefore, intentionally keeping recommendations vague for the objective of always keep uncovering issues to provide us with relevance is a no-no. It's not acceptable. We shouldn't believe that our core existence as internal audit is based on the number of recommendations that we provide or the thickness of our audit reports. On the contrary, the measure of the true IA performance is, in my opinion, to what extent, again, are we achieving stakeholder objectives? So as our role becomes more strategic and industry disruptions impact operations, our focus purely on internal control will decrease. We are seeing now in the post-COVID era how the IA role will further transform into other areas. We are seeing now how internal auditors are requiring so many different set of skills in the technology area and the governance area and the risk management and the governance and the compliance, so on and so forth. Therefore, we do not measure IA success by the number of observations, definitely, as I said, but purely by achievement of audit objectives. Therefore, we should strive to make that process succeed. We need to strive to make these controls work. We need to make sure that we give the root cause recommendations that eliminate, to a large extent or to an extent possible, the possibility of these risks materializing as much as possible. So the sixth one, which is small and big issues. And I have seen this. I have seen this among junior auditors, I've seen it among audit managers, and I have also seen it among chief audit executives. What do we mean by that? So what I mean by small and big issues really is turning small issues into big ones and big issues into small ones, depending on the auditee and other personal and professional objectives. So basically, if I find this, once I was watching the Wells Fargo scandal, and Elizabeth Warren was talking in the Senate, and she was telling the chairman of the board of the bank, telling him that if you caught a teller stealing $100 bill, you'd put him in jail for 3 years. But if an executive indirectly cheats and makes millions of dollars of bonuses, we give them a retirement package. So this is really what I'm talking about, is showing the full force of the internal audit powers on the small guys, while we tend to take it a lot more easier when it comes to those that are more powerful in the organization or have, or maybe the bullies in the organization. So positive impact is made through assisting in the achievement of departmental objectives. I have said that many times. It is easier to make a big issue about a small incident that all stakeholders will agree on. So basically, when I find a small issue, I can make a big issue about it, and then suddenly everyone will be even congratulating me. Yes, you, Mr. Internal Auditor, good job. We agree with you because it's really impacting no one. So suddenly everyone feels the need to congratulate the audit on their beautiful role. But when it comes to the more difficult issues, the critical ones, the big ones, it becomes debatable as to what extent we need to make a big deal out of it or escalate it in the right manner. So marginalizing serious deficiencies will save the headache of confronting critical stakeholders. However, will eventually damage the CAE reputation. So even if they do congratulate the audit function for addressing these small issues, deep down, they know that they are basically taking the auditor for a ride. And it doesn't mean that you are really getting that gratification that you need. Our job is to address all types of issues in the same manner, in the same, depending on their seriousness, in the same escalative procedures that we always adapt. So small issues made big don't provide relevance to the chief audit executive. They just provide you with existence. Okay, and I believe most of us, we are not in this profession just to exist. We're in this profession to make a difference, or at least I hope so. And this is why we need to make sure we don't go down that track of just making noise to sound relevant. So tackling the major obstacles that impede the achievement of objectives is really what really matters to us. So we need to make sure that we tackle these major issues as powerfully as possible to make sure that all stakeholder issues are well handled and taken care of. So beating up the little guy, I spoke about that maybe a little bit as well. So showing the mighty force of internal audit on the little guys in the organization that have no organizational political backing, while more diplomatic and politically correct with the big guys. So this is what I was giving an example earlier on Wells Fargo. So basically CAEs who use their mandate in different ways with different people cause harm on themselves, their departments, and jeopardize the effectiveness of internal controls. So key considerations: credibility comes from fairness. If you are seen as a fair internal auditor, although you might not be popular among many, but definitely no one can question your credibility, which is your passport to success. Objectivity is a critical part of our profession, being objective with everyone, regardless of their position in the organization. Earning the trust of all parties. Believe me, even those that you disagree with wholeheartedly will respect you if you are taking a stand that you support. Long-term sustainability for the CAE is being correct with everyone. We need to be correct. And this is why we don't show the muscles of internal auditors on those that cannot handle it, while we become lenient on those that we perceive are stronger than us. Now, rationalizing incompetence. What do I mean by that? Rationalizing incompetence, taking a proactive role in rationalizing the reasons behind incompetency in management processes, or even, God forbid, anyone, quasi-like fraudulent behavior. What do I mean by that? First, as I said before, we need to be an enabler of positive change and not an inhibitor of good performance. CAEs may present to the audit committee their findings and recommendations, followed by rationalizations as why these findings exist. So basically, a chief audit executive, he has a very delicate matter to address, and he wants to satisfy both parties, the audit committee and the management, who's maybe sitting on the table with them. So he tells the audit committee, oh, we noted 1, 2, 3, 4, and guess what? They did 6, 7, 8, 9. Everyone's happy. Okay, look, in certain cases, this is welcome. Personally, I welcome it in certain cases because it highlights a good, healthy cooperation with management. However, it needs to be treated with care as not to become a tool for rationalizing incompetent behavior that has no solution. So basically, if you go to that audit committee to present an issue and a solution at the same time that you agreed with management, just make sure that this solution is real and implementable, and now we're not just kicking the can for the next audit committee to come across. This is where it becomes toxic, in my opinion. What makes the internal audit successful is when everyone does their job in the right way. The auditor recommends, the management accepts, and the management addresses the actions that need to be taken. Ambiguity. What do I mean by ambiguity, and what does this trait address? They never take a clear stance or position, keeping it very gray, with the intention of always falling on the right side when things become clearer. Now, this is a dangerous one. So basically, this is a situation where something happens in the organization, something sensitive, and the auditor needs to give an opinion. So they're really not sure. They don't want to maybe to step on the wrong foot. So they give something that is very vague. Regardless of result, they will actually turn it around some way to be on the winning side. So clarity of position is essential for long-term audit success. What do we mean by that? First, 4 issues. Clarity. CAEs need to take a clear position as to their specific issues and related recommendations. Your positions need to be clear based on the best knowledge that you have at that point in time. Again, we are all prone to error. Based on the data we have, we take a clear position. We are objective regardless of what's at stake. We recommend what is the best for the ultimate stakeholders of the organization. We don't need to worry about falling on the wrong side of the organizational spectrum, okay? This is something do not consider. Think about what's right based on the issue at hand. Be comfortable, win yourself that at the end of the day, you expressed what you truly believed in. You are an auditor. I always say that we are not politicians, thankfully. So, last one, audit committee management communications. And this is a critical one. So telling the management one thing while portraying something completely different to the audit committee, or using a different tone between what is said and what is written. And yes, I'm talking about covering our backs without highlighting in our tone the seriousness of the situation. It is not enough, in my opinion, just to write about something. Your tone and the audit committee is waiting to hear us, to hear our tone. Our tone makes a big difference. And I have seen that sometimes for us not to have this confrontation that we don't want, we sit with the management and we explain something in a certain way. And then we sit with the audit committee and we explain it in another way while tackling the same core issue, really. And what we write is completely different. And we run at risk of people not reading at the top, which happens a lot. And then 1 year down the line, a big bomb explodes. And then everyone comes and asks, okay, where was the internal auditor? And then the internal auditor says, wait a second, I wrote about this. Okay, you wrote about it. The way you express yourself, people, that is some form of communication, which we need to make sure is consistent with what is written and what is said. So what is written in the audit committee report is not consistent with the CAE presents verbally in the committee. This is essential. So please, whatever you want to express, make sure that it's expressed in the same tone that it's written and communicated. Inconsistencies between the audit committee report and the individual departmental report. This is also an issue. So you would read the departmental report and you would find it very serious in tone. And then when you read the audit committee report relating to that specific area, you find that the tone has went down. This is dangerous. Borderline toxic, in my opinion. Approach communications with key stakeholders with a specific objective of covering one's back. We talked about that. Highlighting the issue to management in one way and presenting it to the committee in a different manner. This may help you succeed in pushing the problem forward, but believe me, it won't go away. Downplaying specific topics in the committee while presenting them in a different manner in the written report as discussed. So how can we really avoid toxicity in internal audit, in my opinion? Well, look, some people, in all my presentations, I always focus on the role of the nomination and remuneration committee, which I truly believe is, to a large extent, from my experience, undervalued. It's not provided with the seriousness it deserves, and when it does exist, I don't believe it's existing in the right way. So this committee has a nominating role and a remuneration role, a nominating role to ensure nominating the right people in the right places, from the chief audit executives to the CEO to the board directors. Most importantly, ensuring that the audit committee diversity is essential to enable a strong chief audit executive to assess his performance or her performance in the right way, and to identify toxicity and address it straight off the bat. So this is why I say I need a strong nomination and remuneration committee is a first step, because it really makes sure that I have the right people in the right place. And if I have the right people in the right place, I mitigate the risk of toxicity to a very large extent. Currently, this is an area that needs major improvement, but for a discussion for another day. Diversified multi-skill audit committee, an audit committee that has people with an audit background, with an industry background, that have experience to identify, to challenge that internal auditor and identify these traits if they do exist. Tone at the top in the institution from the board down, the culture in the organization, and the strength of the value system of that organization will eliminate toxicity, not just in internal audit, but all throughout the organization, and a strong implementation of a strong code of ethics. So before I conclude, I would like to conclude with a message to all my chief audit executives, to all my friends and my colleagues. And it's the following. First, don't be afraid to lose your job. Be afraid to lose your reputation. This is my first message when we're talking about toxicity, okay? Because your reputation will get you all the jobs in the world. Good people will make it anywhere they go. This is something we also need to focus on. Speak your mind at all times, professionally and reasonably. Don't hesitate. You will regret it, believe me. We belong to an amazing profession, bound by detailed standards. Apply them and don't worry. If we go through the IIA standards, you will find the implementation standards and all the different guidance documents. There is not a problem we face that doesn't have a solution. And this is basically the strength of this wonderful profession, that these standards, they are not just detailed, they are evolutionary. They change with the times. They address all the different types of challenges organizations face as they transform. Do your work with good intentions, and good results will follow. This is a key part. Intentions in the audit business, in my opinion, is a foundational part of our job. Take care of your team and they will take care of you. This is very important. Eliminate toxicity from your team, even among your team, these small auditors that could be toxic, you need to address them. And at the same time, take care of your team and they will protect you. Be straightforward and communicate the same consistent message to all stakeholders. You will earn the respect of everyone. Work with the internal audit code of ethics in mind. This is the foundational principles of our job. If you don't belong to them, they don't belong to you. Get out. Toxic behavior may help some get to the top, but I assure you, it will not help them stay there. So this is why we need to always abide by the standards. And as a final comment, I look forward to future sessions because I came under heavy criticism when I wrote the article on toxicity in internal audit. I look forward to addressing the toxic CEO in my next article, inshallah. So thank you for being such a wonderful audience. And I look forward in future seminars that we meet in person and better days, better healthy days, hopefully. Have a great day. And I welcome any questions you may have.
Muhammad, thank you very much. Indeed, very interesting and definitely thought-provoking. May I just say that you have really told every CAE over here that he or she must walk a very, very, very tight line, a rope.
Absolutely.
A couple of questions, Muhammad, if you can take them.
Yes, please.
In one of your slides that the CAE may be, having conflicting expectations from them, whether they are stakeholders on the client side or on the management side, doesn't matter. What would be your advice? I know you gave you gave 7, 8, 10 points in the last slide, but what would be your advice to the CAE, when they are expected to perform the role of a head of the department, internal audit department, but sometimes also they are seen as representing one of the stakeholders' interests simply because they have the capacity and they are the eyes, they have things open to them. How would you ask the CAE to take this matter forward?
Okay, look, my key advice when we're addressing this is to keep our eye on the ball. What is the ball? It is the strategic objectives of the organization. Never in my career have I failed to convince any stakeholder when the initial point of my discussion was specifically focused on the achievement of strategic objectives. And this is where communication is key for chief audit executives. If you go to a key stakeholder talking about a minor issue, or you weren't able to really express the message or to send that information through, then yes, they will not take you seriously and you will not succeed. However, if you go to them with those issues that you really believe will address how we can better become a better organization and achieve those objectives, there is no discussion that you cannot win. That's one. Two, you need to properly set your expectations with all your stakeholders. With your audit committee, you need to be very clear about the culture of the organization and what you're trying to do. With the CEO, you need to be very clear that he or she has a very good understanding about the role of internal audit in the organization and what you are also achieving to do. And same applies to the remaining of your stakeholders. As long as you keep good and open, transparent information flow that is consistent among all key stakeholders, you are fine with a focus on your strategic objectives. But if you go otherwise, this is where problems will start.
Thank you very much. And there's another question, Mohammed. We have in this conference, the delegates who are listening are at senior level. Some of them definitely will be playing mentor to the junior auditors who are either beginning their career or midway through their career themselves, and themselves probably aspiring to grow up the ladder. In your experience, have you ever come across such a behavior from a CAE, getting rubbed on to his reports or probably little down the organization hierarchy, if I can say? And what
can you repeat that last sentence because you got cut off?
Okay. So some of them would be mentoring their junior auditors, either middle management level or even
Yes.
Definitely, we want to make sure that as we grow up the ladder, climb the ladder, we want to climb in the right manner. And as you very correctly put, by applying our code of ethics that the IIA so very strongly advocates. Have you, in your experience, number one, seen the behavior of a CAE getting rubbed on to his or her direct or indirect reports, and what advice you would give to them to either not get influenced or come out of it?
Okay, very good question. First thing, I experienced among teams, among audit managers and juniors and seniors, I've seen many toxic traits that they don't know they have. Like, for example, I have encountered among teams I have managed, for example, the conspiracy theorists, for example. You'll have these auditors that are junior or senior who always believe someone is committing a fraud somewhere, that there's always a conspiracy going on, there's always someone trying to do shady business. These are one of the first traits that I try to handle and to explain to them why we need to get these thoughts out of our mind. So these are some type of toxic traits that I will find among staff. For example, taking it emotional with the auditees, trying to fail the auditees. You will find that among seniors and managers, because these are people down the chain of the audit function that are not aware of the full picture around them, and their mind might lead them into certain directions. So as a mentor, the first advice I have for you is find these people in your teams and coach them well. Coach them to get these ideas and thoughts out of their mind. Coach them to understand that we are a profession that is run by evidence, that is run by what we see in front of us. We don't make conclusions about what we don't know. We don't make conclusions about what we don't see. And we definitely don't make conclusions about what we do not understand. So this is my first advice to coaching and mentoring your team along those traits, because they could have them going within the team, especially the conspiracy theorists. Now, the second part of your question, have I noted any CAEs that had these kind of traits? Actually, I have never been in a position to manage a CAE myself, but I have colleagues. And yes, I have seen them many of the times, not with the intentions of being toxic, but purely maybe personality or human nature. We talked about these things together, but I haven't been in a position to manage a CAE, honestly, and see that in him. I have seen it in people that I have managed, yes.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. The interesting point, and I'm sure a lot of food for thought for the weekend. I'll